So live your truth, grow your self worth. Hey, welcome to another rarely conversation with myself, Tony Jalen, and the wonderful. That's you.
Oh, hi, Danielle.
Danielle Jalen. Hey, today we're going to be talking about this topic here. You hear a lot about authentic leadership, and I've had some time to really reflect on it over the last few days, and uh, we're going to talk about that. About living your truth and growing yourself. And is there such a thing as authentic leadership, or is it just being a leader? And for those guys who are joining us live on Twitter, good day to you. YouTube, hello, great to have you. Or in our rare leaders, hey, great to have you here. So, living a happy life is everyone's goal. I mean, who doesn't want to feel good about themselves? And yet, and I believe I've been in this camp, sometimes we live with a life without feeling undeserving, or able, or wish we were walking another path. However, though, like living a happy life, being a happy person, is a matter of how you perceive yourself and your place in the world. Agree or disagree, Danielle?
Yeah, I think where you place the value on yourself is how you're going to feel, no matter what situation you're in.
Yeah. I mean, they talk a lot about how your identity does determine how you show up. And what I've learned is that self knowledge is the key to living a happier life. And that means living your truth, not other people's truth or what society tells you is your truth. And why is that such a challenge? I mean, I know I've gone through a challenge, Danielle, but like, how, like, what's a challenge for so many people, or why have you been challenged with living your truth at times versus living someone else's truth for you?
Well, I think it comes down to a lot of wanting to make everyone happy and how do you please everyone. And I think once you fall into that, where you're trying to make everybody happy, is when you truly become unhappy because you're trying to fill these expectations that everyone has of who you are and what you should be doing, and instead of filling who you are by yourself and living to that a level of who you expect yourself to be living like.
And later in this conversation, we're going to be talking about, 5 steps to living a more authentic life. But that's a challenge, though, what you just said here, Danielle, moments ago about, making other people happy. Because isn't there those times where others see, quote unquote, you to be more, see that you are capable of doing those things? Like, how do you balance on what other people think you can do or should be versus what you believe? I think sometimes we limit ourselves on what we can be too.
Well, I think I just kind of look at this as an example of like being the team mom for the volleyball players, and everyone's all excited, like you do such a great job of like getting all these things set up and the team together and the dinners planned and like all that stuff. And for me, it's just coming from a place of this is what I'm expecting if I were on a team and how I want to have things done for me. And so I just go from a place of this is what I would be expecting from a team mom. And so these are the things that I'm going to do because I feel that they're important, not only for parents to be together, to get along, to not have, but also for the players to have a place to go to and to be fed and like all these things. And so I just really, for me, I think it's just taking it from like not so much like what they're expecting of me, but what I'm expecting of me.
Oh, that's great there, because I think we talked about that one of our other calls. Is like there's standards that you have for yourself, and there's expectations of others, right? And I think when you expect things of others, they're gonna eventually just fail you in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I think it's important just to have, hey, you know what, you have standards for yourself, and those are the expectations. And I appreciate what you said. If I was in this position, or if I was seeing someone in a position, this is what I would expect someone to do. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And an ongoing process of like self-analysis and self-examination, it truly leads to greater understanding and like oneself in terms of your belief systems. And there's a book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. If you've not read that book, I highly encourage you to read that book because it talks about emotional intelligence. I mean, there's a difference between intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence, truth, and growing your self worth. We want to become more aware, right? Because through awareness is how we grow. And if you don't know who you are, and it's easy to get caught up in losing yourself, right? Then what happens is that you're not showing your true self in the world. And I don't know, I think when that happens, I think you're living almost like a passive life, reacting to whatever comes along instead of taking control. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think if you don't have some sort of a plan of what your thoughts are, like how you feel that you should be, or the growth, or where you're at as a person, like if you don't know where you are, it's easy to get lost, because no matter which direction you turn is going to be something like it, unless you have a plan of how you are expecting to show up for yourself, you're going to feel lost.
Yeah, and I think it too is that without that plan, it's easy just to go through the motions, right? And not being intentional with things. It could be intentional in terms of having a conversation with someone, intentional of you're working out. I read, or I listened to or read this morning that you don't have a weight problem, you don't have a physical problem, you have a mental problem. I'm like, so this extra 19 pounds I got here is not a physical problem, it's a mental problem. And the more I thought about that, I would have to agree to some extent because I'm like, all right, mentally, the mind, the body doesn't want to exercise, right? You got to fight that battle some days. And I think too, in terms of living truth and growing your self worth, we got to snap out of that, like living unconsciously, like living like half asleep, so that way we can be our best self. And I think too, sometimes people say, you know what, hey, I got to be myself. That doesn't mean going off the grid, does it?
No, it doesn't mean going off the grid. It just means, and it doesn't mean that you have the card to act as a jerk either, and just be like, well, this is who I am, like it or not. Like, I don't think it gives you that entitlement either. I think that there's a there's a place for not caring what people think and being who you are in a way that's respectful, because if you're being disrespectful in how you're presenting it, you're disrespecting yourself in how you're presenting yourself.
Right. And in terms of like living your truth and growing your own self worth, it does mean a daily practice of being honest about how you're feeling and why, and reminding yourself that you are in control of how you feel. And I think we gotta have like rules that you want to live your life by. And are your rules something that someone else is the rules you're living by? I think there's a society acceptance kind too, or is it the rules that you've set up? And the rules that you've lived up until this point, do they still fit the life that you want to lead? So I'll give you an example. This was like an aha moment for me, actually in the last week, because I think about all the opportunities that I've been given to speak, or pursue speaking, motivational speaking, inspirational speaking, whatever you want. And then I had like an aha moment last week, just recently, probably in the last 7 days. I think one of the reasons why I really truly haven't pursued it to the level which I believe I can is because my value is to spend time with my family and be there for Ezekiel while he's home. I literally thought about like that was one of my conflicts. Like as much as my mind wanted that, the value in which I made my decisions, like no, I like being on stage, I love talking, but I'm not ready for that season yet because I've got just a handful more years. My our son at home. I want to enjoy that time, and I think that's okay. And that's when you're starting to live your truth, right? Like even though you can do certain things, it doesn't mean you need to go do them. And so here are 5 steps that we personally learned to live more authentically. I think the first one is, and you mentioned this Daniel moments ago, you got to be clear about how you want your life to be right now and where you want to go. And understand and live by your values and beliefs. Like that's why it's important, I believe, to identify what those rules you're gonna want to live by, what those values are, because like how much does that help in making decisions?
Well, I think if you're basing your decisions on your values and what your beliefs are, it's easier to be able to say no to something instead of being the person that is always looked to say yes. Like, it's being able to set boundaries and stick to them, and not saying that the boundaries can't change as life changes, but to really understand like what your beliefs and values are, and then being able to make your decisions based on those and not feeling guilty because you're staying true to yourself.
And that's a good point. I mean, that's actually the number two thing in order to live more authentically is you got to set and maintain conscious boundaries. You got to be clear in your mind so that you can be at peace with what you can and can't control. And I can recall numerous times where if that my values weren't clear or they weren't at the forefront and I made a decision, I'm like, oh man, afterwards I regret. But I think, like you said, if you have those rules in which you're going to live by right now, you could be confident in those decisions. Because you're like, no, like this is my rule for my life. This is my values of what I value. So that's number two. Here's an important thing in terms of like growing your self-worth. Being aware of yourself and how you react and interact with other people, situations, events, and the world. How does that help in terms of living a like more authentic life for you?
Well, I think this kind of, for me, it kind of hits because it's like you have different groups of people that you're around or something. And in one situation, they look at you like you're the leader of your team and it's a work environment and they have this. And then you have your friend group that like, woe is me, like everything sucks. And it's like, it can be that way, but it kind of leads to a little bit of like drama and drainingness because you're trying to be 50 different people to the 50 different groups that you're with. And so if you just are maintaining a standard of living that you're comfortable with who you are, like personal problems are your personal problems, deal with them at home. They're not for public postings on social media and whatever. Um, I think it allows you to just live your authentic life. Like everyone has problems. Like the pictures and stuff you see on social media are a picture. It's exactly that. It's what that person wants you to see. Everything's rosy or everything's drama, like whatever it is. And I think when you are more aware of how you are reacting and are around people, it gives you a freedom to just be you and not have to worry about, oh, what was going on at this time, or like feeling bad that you're doing well at something. Like as long as you are just being authentic to yourself and like truly living your life, I think is important.
Yeah, because I mean, I think you surprised me, Danielle. You mean problems that I go through or is not just like reserved for me? I mean, other people have them too. Yeah, I read a post actually. I'm going to share this real quick here, and I think it's important to remind ourselves in terms of. I'm going to probably forget it now. Um, like how we are truly reacting to things. I'm not going to find it in time. But basically, it was a picture of people lined up, and they were like going into the sky, basically passing on. And it talked about how everyone was dying. Someone's dying every minute of every day. And I think that the people that we work so hard to impress and have them like us, they may not even like you. um, but that's why it's important to understand, like when to know if your values are aligned, you got those rules like identified. It tells you, okay, like when this situation happens, this is probably how I'm going to react, right? So it gives you more self awareness, like not to react, but to respond instead. Um, and this goes to the next part here is you got to be okay with imperfection in yourself and others. I know some people want to have perfection, and we sometimes strive for it, but that's reserved for the Almighty, in my opinion. And even then, you read the good book, it talks about how he says he wasn't perfect, right? Um, this is sometimes a hard thing to get through, though, being okay with imperfection in yourself and others. Because if you don't, if you seem too perfect, people are just waiting for you to you know? Why is it important then been for you to be objective about your weaknesses so that you can improve upon them without letting them get you down?
Well, I think it's understanding like where your strengths are, and um, I think that it's important to have the mind shift of progress, not perfection. What are you basing your determining what your self-worth is on? Are you progressing? Are you going backwards? It's not about being perfect because nobody's going to be perfect. And I think for me, two things come into my mind that I always start to stress and worry about is like when we have people coming over, like our house isn't perfectly clean. Like there's little things here and there. And I'm like, but we live here. Like this is our everyday life. And if I'm not okay with us looking like we live here, then I'm striving for perfection, not progress. Like I don't want a disaster in the house, but at least I'm getting better at like it doesn't have to be 100% like show ready, like we just moved in or something, like we live here. And I think another thing that comes up is like just sitting down last night and doing this sign up genius for dinners at nationals next week when we're in Orlando. Like, what does that look like? Like, how do we account for everybody that's going to be eating so we can plan for enough people? How does this look like people sharing the cost of these meals? Because obviously, I don't expect two families to feed 50 people, like what does this look like? And I don't have the answer. And just being able to say, into suggestions, feel free to like pass them along because I don't know. I don't have all the answers. And I think when you're okay with being able to not be perfect, it allows more freedom in who you can be.
Tell, Share a little bit more about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think when you are so focused on being perfect and having this perfect picture that everyone sees, like you're so worried yourself about messing up that you probably are going to mess up, and then you're worried about the embarrassment of messing up and all this stuff, and you're so worried that you're not actually even living a life. Like you're constantly just always worried, and that's not, I don't think anybody wants to live in a worried state all the time.
No. Well, they say worry works well. 97% of it never happens. All right. Because I think it's important, and when you're in a leadership position, yes, you have a different responsibility that comes with being a leader, right? You have more eyes on you. I remember one time sitting down with a pastor. We met for coffee, and we had a very vulnerable conversation. He's like, one, whenever anyone, because I'm the pastor, I think I always have the answer, you know, and two, it seems like no one like allows me to talk, right? And he goes, I get it and stuff like that, but like, there's, I feel there's so much. This is what the pastor said. I feel that there's such a magnifying glass on me as a pastor that I get so caught up in the things. I get so caught up making things look perfect that I end up, like you said, falling and making mistakes. He goes, I am still a human being. And that doesn't justify making mistakes and whatnot, but we are still human beings, right? Like we evolved from, well, some people say an ape. I don't believe it's an ape, but we evolved in terms of our brain and our thinking, and so we still have some of those tendencies. We are animals, but we got the thing called a conscious that animals don't typically have. I think they sometimes do though. I've seen our dogs get pretty guilty at times when they know they didn't do something right. Um, but you got to be objective about your weaknesses so that you can improve upon them without letting them get you down. Right? You have so much more gifts to give the world that those gifts overshadow your weaknesses, and sometimes be okay with that. Like I know as a coach, there's some things that whether it's coaching on leadership in business or athletics, there's some things that I'm really good at, and there's some things that I'm not so good at, right? And I can get better at that. I can take those from a 3 to a 5, right? But I can't let that get me down, you know. And I truly believe that living your truth means taking responsibility for your life and building like a deep self knowledge that will ultimately lead to contentment and happiness. Because they say sometimes, oh, you got to be this authentic leader. Sometimes being that authentic leader, like the situation calls for you to be a complete badass. It calls for you to get in someone's grill. Calls on you to get completely uncomfortable, right? Because that's not you to do those things. That's not you to do X, Y, Z. So is that not being authentic? I don't think so. I think about it's like like you said, like in the beginning of our conversation here today, being like a team parent, which you do an amazing job. By the way, guys, if I had an applause like sound effect right now, I would do that applause sound effect to Neil, because if you all knew the work behind the scenes, because she cares so much about the team and creating that team culture and whatnot, you'd be blown away. You're like, oh my god, all that, like she does all that. Like I sit there some days going, thank God she's taking ownership of this responsibility because my brain is too full. It definitely would not be to the level of Daniil. I know that for a fact. Great job, Daniil, and being an awesome team parent, and not just this year, other years too. And I know that the families that we get to coach and the players and also the coaches appreciate your attention to that detail. So as we finish up here in terms of living your truth and growing your self-worth, we talked about 5 steps to do that. Number 1, be clear about how you want to live your life to be right now and where you want to go. 2 is be aware of yourself and how you react and interact with other people, situations, events, and the world. 3, set and maintain conscious boundaries. So be clear in your mind and be at peace with what you can and you cannot control. 4, be okay with imperfection in yourself and others. We shared this on another call from a couple that have been married for many, many years. And I asked them what was the key to your success. He's like, when you perfectly accept that your spouse is imperfect, you start living in a perfect world. And then finally, and this is the one we didn't really dive into that much in detail, but you got to be kind and forgiving to yourself and others. That's true. You got to forgive yourself. We've talked about this over the last few weeks about, you know, that self-acceptance, that self-love. So as we finish up here, Danielle, and growing your self-worth, what would be some final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Just be willing to accept yourself for who you are and know that you're not going to make everybody happy. It's okay to say no. And that while you are growing yourself, um, you're never going to reach perfection. And that just to use along the way opportunities to continue to progress towards your best self.
Right. And I think to add on to that, it's you don't have control over how your story began, but you do have control on how your story can end. Until next week, I'm Jalen, joined by one for Danielle Jalen. Remember to be a rare leader, a leader who is resourceful, adaptable, resilient, engaging, and willing to really contribute and make the world a better place. If you found value in our conversation, please do share. Again, this is on YouTube, Rare Leaders. Twitter, it's simply my name, Tony J. And in the Facebook group, if you're not part of it, please send a request so we can add you into the group. Other than that, onward upwards.